Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining as we learn the ins and outs of Epic Games' verse coding language. In this video, we're going to talk about what is called a failure or failable expression in verse. We'll also cover failure context, which is where failable expressions can happen, as well as some examples and use cases. Near the end, we'll compare how a failure would translate to some other coding languages. And we're also going to see how to create a failable function or one that decides. So stick around and don't miss it. To follow along, you're going to make sure that you have UEFN installed, of course, as well as Microsoft's VS Code. All right. You will be prompted to download VS Code as soon as you open the verse in UEFN. So let's look at some documentation. So here in Epic's documentation for verse, we have the failure. Failure is control flow. All right. So this is what's going to dictate the flow of your game other than the code going from top to bottom. So other programming languages use Booleans, right? This uses these control flow operators like if, right? And then that's where we can put our failable expressions inside of a failure context, right? So a failure context is where it's allowable to execute failable expressions. All right. Now, what happens is a form of speculative execution, meaning that it's going to try things. If it succeeds, you'll get the results, right? If it doesn't, then the effects are rolled back, and we're going to see some of that today. So, as you see here, the example that they give is indexing an array, right? If you were to do this in other programming languages, you would get array index out of bounds, right? Which is bad. So we don't want our programs to crash, so we're going to make sure that, well, verse is actually going to make sure of that for us, and that's what this is. Now we're here in UEFN, and if you don't know, verse is right up here, and we can open the verse explorer, which will open this over here, and we're going to click and add new verse file to project, and we're just going to continue with the documentation. So we're going to do create empty, and I want to just kind of highlight exactly how the documentation may leave out a couple things. So let's let VS Code get opened up here. So let's open VS Code up here. I'm sure we can just double click on this and voila. So now the documentation said that an array was a failable expression. So let's initialize an array. We'll say my array is an array of integers, and we'll initialize it to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, missed 3, didn't I? And you may see Copilot and some other things going on in the background, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're missing out on anything. Now, if we try to index into the array, we get all kinds of errors, right? We're talking about decides here, missing return type, right? Let's look at another way. How did they do it in the documentation? So in order to set an element array, you actually have to use that set keyword. But I just want to continue to go through some of these errors that you're going to see and how this part is actually not failable, setting it. But if you wanted to say that this number as an integer, and then it equals my array, and then we're going to index into it. That's when we get problems, right? Decides effects, okay? But I want to prove something or show something else here that the documentation doesn't show, and that we can't do this in just a regular verse file without it being inside of a function or something. As you can see, it says expected definition, right? So it wants us to have a function here. If we're going to have this, most outdented furthest to the left, we have to have function names here. So let's say we had one. Some beautiful names. And say it takes in integer of x, and returns an int. So now inside here, we can do this. And it's not yelling at us right now because I don't have anything here. Just to be clear, it's still mad. And this is just mad that I didn't return anything. So I'm just going to move this down. And then in here, I'll just say return number. All right. So now we have it. There's no errors. All right. You can see Copilot's helping me out, but the logic is there. Now, the problem is we can't call this function unless we're in another function or an event. So let's go ahead and create a device. All right, back in UEFN, we're going to create a device. I'm going to call this array as device, because that's what we're going to do in there. Let's get it opened up. And now let's replace some of code there with code from here. And we'll see that we can actually call this function right here. So these first files are linked. Now, this isn't showing anything, so let's print something. Let's run this. So I'm going to pause. All right, now that Fortnite is up and running, we can see we have our log verse 3. And if we look at what that means, we are turning this second, which is the third element, right? The second index, and assigning it to this value. So there is a failure context here. All right. Now, let's give our device a couple of editables. For the second device, I'm going to have it be a creative. All right, so let's say we want to get at that number again, right? In one of the arrays. Let's just look at the different ways we can do that. So we can't do it straight out of the gate, right? It needs that. So we can do the if, like we saw right here. We can do that if, and if we read it says we can do it decides. It can be left-handed or some other stuff, right? Logic macros. We'll see it in a for loop also. So let's take it down and let's make this decider function, right? And we have to mark it with decides, x. Let's void. Actually going to want to return an integer. And then I'm going to bring this down here. So now, and again, I can call my decider. Then we get this error, right? So anytime you are using the decides effect, you have to call it with square brackets. Now, the weird thing is that you still have to put it in an if statement, right? And we're not doing anything with the value that it returns. And actually, that's probably why it's complaining down here. So let's do that. And then we will return that new number. Right, so we still have to wrap this in some kind of if statement. If it was number, and we can just open and close the code block. All right, so that will run. All right, and let's see that run in the terminal. We will print newest number. All right. So what's the problem here? Stop it, Copilot. Unexpected. Oh, sorry. Actually, I do have to do a couple things. Reverse. Be able to print something. But unidentified newest number. Well, we have it right there. Why is it unidentified? Right? So it only exists inside this code block. Right? So if I do that, it still is not happy because I didn't put a code block, and that's why it doesn't know to be mad about this. Now, if I just replace this with the colon, or I could have done the curly braces, either one. So now it can access that because this if has passed, right? And then we can access it. So let's test it out. So momentarily we should see, nice, we get 3 again, and that is exactly what we expect. So let's look at these editables that you may have seen up here, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to try to cast both of them as a button device, and we shall see that one of them will fail. Now, if we want to pass something, all we have to do is pass it into the brackets. Pass the button equals when you put the device type, or the type rather, and then your square brackets, and then you pass in what you want to cast. All right. Here we are again. All right. These brackets, this is a decides function. That means it needs to be in something that will have a decides right? Or it could be an if or whatever, right? In some sort of failure context. Let's actually still call this and see if it passes, right? And what we would really like to do is print this number here, right? You'll see why. We're going to get a little taste of the rollback features going on. So we see our 3 still. We see our 3 again at the bottom. That's our most recent one. Let's clear the log. And that's expected because this cast is not going to fail. Actually, there's nothing there. So let's bring in our button. And let's select it. And for create a device, the only thing we can choose is itself. And what we'll do is duplicate this down. And this time it's going to be the casted device. And I'm going to pass in that device, which we know is not of type button device, right? It's that new class we just created. So let's push this and we'll see it in a second. Aha. So rolling back, 3 is the new number. All right. So it did not print 3 is the newest number. All right. It did this line. It saved that value. It printed it. But it knew it was rolling back by the time it actually printed it somehow. So because this line failed, this line never runs, and this doesn't exist. Okay? So that is the rollback feature of the verse. Right? It's pretty cool. Now we're going to put a couple more things in here and see how we can do a failable expression in a for loop for a casting device. So what I'm doing here, I've got a couple lights. Well, I've got this one light in the scene so far. I'm putting a verse tag markup on it, and I'm going to go to our code. All right, so what I've got here is a function call to find creative objects with tag, and I'm using a tag that I just created, and I've tagged some lights in the level. Now, we have videos on that, and you can look at those, but right now I'm just going to show you about casting and how that can fail. So if we just say for light, lights, and we want to turn on the light, okay? Unknown member, turn on in creative object interface. Well, if I look at a customizable light device, and we go to the digest, we see turn on is right there, right? But the fact is that this is a customizable light device and not what is saying here, a creative object interface. So our function call here returns a generator, which just gives a value on each iteration and not quite an array. So we have to cast, right? So we could say, all right, well, the sure light would be equal to, shouldn't have deleted that. Oh, there we go. And we want to make it a light. So here we go with the failure stuff, right? So we could say if. Close that, and then here we could say sure light, turn on. That works. But the for loops have a nice little trick where you can actually take this, cut it out of there, and add it into the for loop. And now, for every iteration, it will do that thing. And we can print the light is on. I actually want to turn the light off because they're already on. So let's push it and let's see if it works. So as we can see in the scene right now, there are a couple lights. And we look to the left here, we can see that they have the first tag markup, and give them the actual tag. So just after a little push, we can have a special light. Awesome. All right, as we can see, our lights are off. If we look at our console, output log, you should see the light is off. All right, awesome. So that's about it. We're just going to, again, look at the differences between this and some other programming languages real quick. So let's look here. All right, so we have a normal if statement, right? And it does control the flow of things, right? Which is similarly, but we can't set anything in here, right? If we wanted to go down here and say if z equals x plus y, not going to be happy, right? And it's not even going to know why because it's not used to anybody trying to assign variables inside of something like that. So that's not going to work. So we'd have to do the 2 steps of checking to make sure the thing is there and okay, and then using the value. Also, it will let you do something like this, right? Can't divide by 0, right, in math, so this is going to fail. And if I run this code like this, hit it twice the first time, we do see it's working just fine. And with that in it, we get errors, right? Failure. Return XO. Division by 0, right? Now, verse won't even let you write that. I'll return it, sure. So, it's not happy about the integer division. Z equals. Uh, so yeah, incompatible of type void, right? It's not gonna let you do it. That would be it. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.